The first time an astronaut realized training wasn't enough. Training teaches you how to survive failure. It does not teach you how it feels when failure becomes personal. For every astronaut, preparation is absolute. Years of simulations, repeated emergencies, every outcome rehearsed until reaction becomes instinct. The body learns to move before the mind fully processes. The hands reach for switches before fear has a chance to settle. And yet, there comes a moment when reality slips outside the frame of training. A moment when the scenario playing out in front of you does not match anything stored in muscle memory or procedural recall. That is when the astronaut discovers what training was truly building toward, and it is not what anyone expects. To understand why this matters today, we need to understand a dangerous assumption. That preparation guarantees control. Spaceflight is built on readiness, but readiness does not eliminate uncertainty. It only delays it. The entire architecture of astronaut training is designed around the principle that enough repetition can close the gap between expectation and reality. But no amount of repetition can account for every variable. The universe is not obligated to present problems in familiar shapes. The astronaut entered orbit confident. Every system behaved as expected. Procedures flowed smoothly. This was familiar territory, shaped by years of practice. The spacecraft hummed with the precision of engineering tested and retested. Checklists were completed on schedule. Communication with ground control was clear and steady. Nothing suggested that this mission would be different from the ones rehearsed 100 times before. Then something happened that had never happened in training. Not a malfunction, not an alarm. A situation that technically fit the rules, yet emotionally didn't. Data made sense, but the outcome didn't feel contained by procedure. The numbers on the screen told one story, but the instinct forming behind the astronaut's awareness told another. There was no contradiction in the data. There was a contradiction in the feeling the data produced. The astronaut followed the checklist anyway, step by step, calm, precise. But with each action, a quiet realization formed. This situation could be managed, but it could not be predicted. And in that gap between preparation and reality, something shifted. Training was no longer a shield. It was a tool, and tools require judgment. The situation unfolded slowly, which made it harder to recognize. There was no clear failure point, no moment to declare an emergency, just a growing sense that the scenario was drifting beyond the boundaries of rehearsed response. The slow pace of the unfolding was itself a challenge. Emergencies that arrive suddenly activate trained reflexes. Situations that creep forward demand a different kind of attention, one that training rarely cultivates. The astronaut had to stay alert without a trigger, focus without a target. Training relies on patterns. If this happens, do that. If pressure drops, seal here. If power fails, reroute there. But this moment lived between categories. Nothing was wrong enough to trigger alarms. Nothing was stable enough to ignore. It occupied a gray space where protocols overlap without resolving, where two correct procedures pointed in slightly different directions. The astronaut reviewed procedures again, cross-checked assumptions. Everything aligned on paper. And yet, the outcome still felt uncertain. There was a dissonance between what the manuals promised and what the moment demanded. The checklist had no entry for ambiguity itself. This was the weakness no simulation could fully replicate. Real systems interact in subtle ways. Small variations stack. Time introduces complexity. And suddenly, the problem is no longer technical. It is interpretive. A simulator can reproduce failures, but it cannot reproduce the specific texture of uncertainty that emerges when multiple systems behave normally yet combine in unexpected ways. The real danger was not in any single reading. It was in the space between readings, where patterns hid from direct observation. Ground control offered guidance, but even their confidence was cautious. Data arrived clean but delayed. Recommendations came framed as options, not instructions. The distance between orbit and Earth added latency not just to communication, but to confidence. By the time a suggestion arrived, the situation had already shifted slightly. The astronaut began to understand that support from the ground was a resource, not a solution. The astronaut realized something unsettling. Training had brought them here, but it could not carry them through what came next. This was the moment where judgment replaced rehearsal. Every decision now shaped the path forward, not because rules were broken, but because rules were no longer enough. And that realization marked a turning point. From this moment on, the mission would be defined not by preparation alone, but by how one human chose to act when certainty ran out. The astronaut stood at the boundary between competence and wisdom. Competence follows instructions. Wisdom knows when to depart from them. The pressure intensified quietly, not through alarms or flashing warnings, but through consequence. Every option carried trade-offs. Every delay narrowed margins. The clock did not stop to allow reflection, and the mission did not pause to accommodate doubt. Time moved forward whether the astronaut was ready or not. An astronaut's body failed before the systems did. The first warning didn't come from an alarm. It came from the body. Everything on board was functioning perfectly. Power stable. Systems nominal. The spacecraft did exactly what it was designed to do. Every instrument reported within expected parameters. Every subsystem operated as intended. The engineering was flawless. The human inside it did not. To understand why this moment still matters today, we need to understand a dangerous assumption in spaceflight. That technology fails before people do. In reality, the body is often the weakest system. Spacecraft are built with redundancy, with backup systems layered upon backup systems, designed to absorb failure and continue operating. The human body has no such architecture. It is singular, irreplaceable, and far more susceptible to the stresses of space than any component bolted to the hull. The mission was routine, demanding but controlled. The astronaut followed procedures, moving methodically through tasks practiced countless times on Earth. The rhythm of work in microgravity had become familiar over the course of the mission. Each task had a known duration, a known sequence, a known physical demand. Nothing about the schedule exceeded what the astronaut had trained for. Then came the subtle signs, slower reactions, heavier limbs, a strain that didn't match the workload. The kind of sensations that arrive without announcement, not pain exactly, but a heaviness that doesn't correspond to effort. The astronaut noticed that movements which had been automatic now required conscious direction. The astronaut checked the data. Everything looked fine. That was the problem. The systems were ready. The body was not. And the gap between those two realities was about to become dangerous. At first, the symptoms were easy to rationalize. Fatigue, dehydration, normal strain from long hours in microgravity. Nothing outside expected limits. The human mind is skilled at explaining away early warnings, especially when those warnings contradict what the instruments say. If the data reports normalcy, the temptation is to override the body's signals and trust the machines. But the body does not report to the same dashboard as the spacecraft. Its warnings are subjective, nuanced, and easy to dismiss. The astronaut adjusted pace, slowed movements, focused on breathing. Training emphasized pushing through discomfort, trusting systems to flag real danger. The culture of spaceflight values endurance. It rewards the ability to perform under strain. Admitting difficulty feels like a concession, even when it is the most rational response available. But the body sent different signals. Dizziness that lingered, a tightening in the chest, a subtle delay between thought and action. These were not dramatic symptoms. They were incremental. Each one alone was manageable. Together, they formed a pattern that pointed toward a system, the human system, approaching its limit. The astronaut paused, rechecked vitals. Heart rate elevated, but not alarming. Oxygen levels normal. No system indicated immediate risk. The medical telemetry painted a picture of a person within acceptable range. But acceptable range does not account for the subjective experience of the person inside that range. The numbers said continue. The body said reconsider. This was the problem with human failure. It rarely arrives with clear thresholds. Machines fail in binary. A circuit works or it doesn't. A valve opens or it doesn't. The body degrades in gradients. It loses capacity slowly, through accumulation, through compound strain that builds beneath the level of measurable alarm. By the time the instruments confirm what the body already knows, the situation may have already become serious. The astronaut faced a quiet dilemma: continue the task and risk worsening symptoms, or interrupt operations based on instinct alone. The decision was not between safety and danger in any obvious sense. It was between two versions of duty. One version said complete the task, because the mission depends on reliability. The other said stop, because the mission also depends on a functioning crew member. Reporting uncertainty felt premature. Stopping felt unjustified. The mission depended on reliability, not hesitation. The astronaut knew that pausing operations would trigger a chain of events: medical consultations, schedule adjustments, possible reassignment of tasks. All of that felt disproportionate to what might still be temporary discomfort. So the astronaut continued, and with every minute, the body pushed back harder. The strain reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. Movements became deliberate, not by choice, but necessity. Fine motor control faltered. Simple actions required concentration that should have been automatic. The gap between intention and execution widened. The astronaut felt the body operating on diminishing reserves, each task consuming more energy than it should. The astronaut recognized the danger instantly. In space, hesitation compounds risk. Physical impairment can cascade faster than technical failure. A hand that cannot grip precisely is a hand that cannot operate emergency controls. A mind clouded by physical strain is a mind that cannot assess threats accurately. The body's failure was not contained to the body. It threatened to spread into every system the astronaut was responsible for managing. They stopped. Tasks were aborted. The schedule was broken. Ground control was notified with measured clarity. Not panic, not apology, just fact. The astronaut communicated the situation with the same professional discipline applied to any system anomaly. The body had become the anomaly, and it required the same response any failing system would receive. Medical protocols engaged. Workloads reduced. Rest enforced. Monitoring intensified. The systems adapted quickly. The mission structure bent around the new constraint, absorbing the disruption the way it was designed to absorb any unexpected variable. The body needed time the mission had not planned for. Lying still inside the spacecraft, the astronaut confronted an uncomfortable truth. Training had taught endurance. Space demanded self-awareness. The two are not the same. Endurance says push forward regardless. Self-awareness says recognize when pushing forward becomes a greater risk. In the culture of spaceflight, endurance is celebrated. Self-awareness is respected only in retrospect, only after it has been proven correct. Pushing through would not prove strength. Stopping had. The first